Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're not subscribing, you should definitely consider doing that. I do plan to post a lot more on YouTube in the coming days and weeks and months, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, before we get started with the actual video, I just want to promote my website a little bit. So make sure to go to hockey-statistics.com. In here you can find a lot of data, you can find a lot of visualizations, you can find articles and research papers and so on. So make sure to check out my website as well. Now, in this video we want to talk about getting data from the NHL API. This is not a particularly difficult thing to do, and I'm just hoping to show how easy it can be done. So I'll be doing it in Excel actually, instead of doing it in Python or R. And there are some clear advantages and disadvantages to doing it this way, but one of the things that I like is that when you do it in Power Query in Excel or in Power BI, you can connect it directly to Power BI, and I'm doing a lot of my visualizations in Power BI. So that just eases the process of getting data from the API and putting it into visualizations. So anyway, we'll be doing it in Excel, and I just open a blank Excel workbook here, and we'll be doing it all in here, and I will be putting this file in the description under the video when it's all said and done. So the goal here is to just show how easy it is to get data from the NHL API. So let's just start off by going to the internet and go to this page here. It's a GitHub page with the API references. So I use this all the time. It's a good place to find NHL API endpoints that you can use to get data. So the first thing we want to do in this video is we want to just get player information for a specific season for all players in that season. And there's actually nothing about that in this particular reference page, but we'll just go down here and it's down in the REST API, and we'll just get skater stats. So down here we can see there's a lot of information, but we'll just pick up this URL, and then we'll just try and paste it here and see what happens. So we have so now we call the API. We've put in the URL and seen what's coming out. This is in the JSON format. So what this gives us is it gives us the basic stats for all players in that season. Now we're not really interested in the skater stats, we're actually interested in the bios. So we'll just change this summary to bios. So now when we hit enter, it should give us the information that we're interested in. So we're interested in birthday, we're interested in nationality, we're interested in the player ID and player names, and so on and so on. So this is the data that we're interested in. Now, we don't want to have just 72 players. We want to have all the players of the season. So we'll just put in a -1, meaning there is no limit. And we'll have the data start from 0. So now we can hit enter. And now we can go all the way down. And we can see there's 1,156 players in this season, in this data set. And they should all be there. You can see there's quite a lot of rows, so they should all be there. Now, right now we're sorting by points. Doesn't really make any sense, considering we're not looking at points, we're just looking at the information about the players. You can also change the season ID, and you can even look at data from one season all the way up to another season. But we'll just keep it as it is right now. So that's it, I think. So we'll just copy this one and we'll just try and load it into Excel. So the way you do that is you just go to data and you just say from web, and then you just put in the URL and it will work. So we'll just paste it here and see what happens. So now it automatically loads it as a JSON file and we get all the data that we need. So you can see here that it's a total of 1156 players and the data is all within this list. So we'll just click on this list, make it into a table, and now we can just expand the table and all the data that we need will be in this one. It's always a good idea to click on load more because there might be columns that Power Query doesn't find originally. So let's just try and expand all of them now. So here's all the data that we need, plus a little bit more. So there's a lot of information here and we're not really interested in all of this. So let's just pick the columns that we're actually interested in. So we don't really want to look at any of the statistics right now. We just want the player bio info. So let's just pick birth date, draft position, draft year, height, nationality, player ID, that's important. Position code, which position is the player playing, is he a lefty or righty, and the name and the weight of the player. So let's just pick these particular columns and say this is what we want. Okay, so right now we're only getting the skaters. So we're only getting all the skaters, but we also need to get the goaltenders. So in order to do that, we'll just duplicate this one. That's the easiest way to do it. Duplicate this one and we'll call this one goalies. And then in the source code, instead of having this one, it says skater here, we'll just change that to goalie. And hit enter, and now you can see there's 116 goalies playing in this particular season. So we'll just go here and now see this is all the goalies. A few things we need to know. First of all, there is no skater full name because we're not talking about skaters here. And the position code is just null. Because it's a given that because we're looking at goalie stats, goalie data, they are all goalies. So there is no position code here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to just remove those. So we'll just say skater full name, nope. Position code, no. And then we need goalie full name to be in there instead. So we still need the name of the player. It's just a goalie full name now. That being said, now we want to put them all in one table. So we'll just append the two tables, but they need to have the same column names. And we still need to have a column called position code. Or we don't need to have that, but we still want to have the information that all of these players are goaltenders. So we'll just add a column here and we'll just call it position code. I will just say it's equal to G for goaltender. And then we need to ensure that all the column names are the same. So we'll just change this one to name. And do the same in the players table. So we'll just change skater full name to name. Okay, so now we should be able to append the two tables into one. And it should work. So let's just try and do that. So let's go to home, append queries, and append it. So we're just putting all the data in the players table. So we'll append the goaltenders and it's done. So just to make sure they are all there, we can see now we got goaltenders here as well. Okay, so now our players table is actually finished. The last thing we can do is we can just select everything and go detect data type. So now it just automatically tells us if it's a text or a full whole number or whatever the type is, and this is a date. So now we call all the players for the 23-24 season and put them all together in one table. So now we can just load it. To begin with, let's just create a connection. So it's not loading anything into the, because we're not interested in loading the goaltenders because we already have the goaltenders in the players table. So we'll just try and say load to, and it's always a good idea to put it in the data model because then you can fetch it later on. You don't actually need to put it in a table, but let's just put it in a table just to illustrate that we are getting the correct data. So here we got 1,272 players all in all because we got both goaltenders and skaters, and we got all the information that we want. So this is working just perfectly. It was super easy to do. Now we want to do something a little bit more complicated. So we want to create a tool where we can select a date and then it will go fetch the schedule, the play-by-play data and the shift data. So that will be the goal of this video. So the first thing we need to do is we need to select a specific date. So we'll just put in, it could be, so the first thing we need to do is we don't want this as a date and it will automatically make it into a date, but we actually want it as a text because we're going to use it as a text. So let's just put in a text and it could be 2024 01, so it's January 10th. Let's use that as our example date. We can say select date here. And we could even call the sheet select date. Let's do that. Okay, so we want to have a situation where we can put in a date in this table here. It will make it a table in just a second. And then it will load it into Power Query and we'll use that to make our calls to the API. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually add this to our Power Query, add this to our data model. So we'll do that by selecting this and hit from table range, and we'll just say let's load this. So what this gives is it gives us a simple table with just the date here. Now again, we don't want to have a date, we want to actually have the text. So let's just fix this. So now it says year, month, day. This is important because this is what we want, because now we'll just go to the reference page again and let's look at how to go get the schedule. So let's go, actually we cannot get the schedule of just a single day, but what we can do is we can get the schedule of a full week. So that's what we're going for. So let's just go down here. Here it only gets the schedule for Toronto specifically. What we're interested in is the schedule of all teams. So let's just copy this. Try and see what happens here. So you can see it gets the schedule of the date selected, but it also gets the schedule of the next 6 days. But this is the URL that we are going to use. This is the URL that we are going to call. So let's just copy this one for now. So the next thing is, so right now we have a selected date. So we want to turn that into a URL that we can call. So let's just add a column here. And we can call this one link schedule. So we want to add in the schedule in order to call we want to add in the link for the schedule so that we can call the schedule of that specific selected date. So let's just paste the URL that we picked up before. And now instead of having this particular date, we actually want to have the date that we selected. So we'll just say, remove this part and say, and the selected date. So now it gives us the URL that we're interested in. And this one is dynamic, so that when we change the date in our Excel workbook and hit refresh, then this will refresh and this will refresh. Okay. So we're not really interested in this table as a whole, we're just interested in this particular value. So we'll just drill down and say now it's just a text value. So let's rename this to link schedule. And this is what we need to call. So it's super easy, it's the same as we did before when we called the players. So we'll just go to home, new source, other sources, and from web. And here we need to just paste in the URL and see what happens. So let's see here. Okay, so this gives us some information. Now the information that we're actually interested in is in the game week. So we'll just hit this list and convert it into a table. And from here on, we can just expand it. So you can see here that you got 3 games there in a list of this particular date, 13 games in this date, but we are only interested in the selected date, and the selected date will always be the first one, and then the next 6 rows will be the next 6 days. So we're actually only interested in the very first row here. So the first thing we need to do is we just need to keep only the top row. So now we have that information, and we can just maybe you're not interested in these, so let's just remove those first. So now it's only 2 columns and only 1 row, and we can expand these. So it gives us the 3 games. And we can expand these. Again, let's just start off by expanding all of them. So what we're interested in is the game ID, because we're going to use this to call the play-by-play data and the shift data. We're also interested in just the schedule in general. So there's a lot of information here, and some of it is not particularly interesting, so we'll just remove some of that. So let's just go remove what we're not interested in. We need the game ID, we can add the season game type. So if game type is 2, it means it's a regular season game. If it's 3, it's a playoffs game. And if it's 1, it's a preseason game. We can take the start time as well. We can take the game state. Is it finished or is it a future game? Might be interesting to know later on. We need the away team, the home team, and let's take the game outcome as well. So let's take these columns. So we have the date, we have the game ID, we have the time, and so on and so on and so on. We need to expand the away team, and you can see there's a lot of information here. What we are interested in is the abbreviation, that's the team name, and we're interested in the score. So it's Montreal, and they scored 2 goals. And we'll do the same for the home team. just pick the abbreviation and the score, just like that. And we need to change the names here because they don't really make much sense right now. So this one is away team, away score, home team, home score. And now that we are renaming things, I also want to call this one game ID. And finally, we can expand this one. So this just tells if the game ended in a shootout, in regulation, or in overtime. Okay, so I think this is all the information we need from our schedule. So let's just select it all and say detect data type. One thing worth noting here is that it actually says January 10th here, but it says January 11th here at 1 AM. That's because it picks up the Danish time, so the game started at 1 AM in Danish time. So it will give you your local time when you do this. Okay, other than that, it looks great. We'll just rename this to schedule. Now, the next thing is we need to call the API to get the play-by-play data and shift data, and it has to be based on these games. So what we're interested in is we're interested in this game ID. So we'll just add this as a new query, and you have it here, it's game ID. So let's make it into a table. Let's rename it to game ID. And let's actually make it into a text because we're going to use this for our play-by-play URL. So we'll just call this one play-by-play data because that's what this table will end up being. And let's just duplicate it because we also want to have shift data. And in both these cases, the starting point is the game ID. Okay, so now let's go back to our reference page here, and it says go all the way to the top, and what we want to find is the play-by-play data. So we need to go down here to game events, get play-by-play. Let's pick this one up, and this is what we want to need in order to get the play-by-play data. So let's just copy this and then create a new column, and we could call this one link play-by-play. And let's just put in the URL, and then of course we have this fixed game ID here, and we need to make that dynamic. So let's just say and put in the game ID and play-by-play. Should work now. So let's hit OK. And now we have the actual URLs that we need to call. Let's make it into a text. And now we need to call this one, and then call this one, and then call this one. Now, if you were to do this in a tool like Python, you would create a for loop and just run that. And in Power Query, it's a little bit different. So you need to create a parameter and then create a function and then invoke that function on this column. It sounds a little bit complicated. It's really not. You just need to get used to doing it. So let's just start off by picking one of these. It doesn't matter which one it is. We'll use this to create a temp table because we need that in order to create our function. So we'll just load it, other sources, web, and we'll just load it here. And so far, this is not different than what we did with the schedule or the players. There's a lot of information here. We're not interested in any of it except for the plays. This is the play-by-play data. So we're interested in this list, and we just convert it into a table. And then we can expand it. But let's just wait with that. We don't want to do that just yet. We just want to create a table that calls the URL, picks up the plays, and converts it into a table. So that's what our function needs to do. But we can't build a function just yet because we don't have any parameters. So what we need to do is we need to create a new parameter. And parameter is like a variable, so it can change based on whatever you put into it. So we'll just call this parameter link play-by-play. So we want to put in the URLs that we want to call. That's basically what we want to do. It has to be a text, and we'll just paste this URL as our starting point, as our current value. So let's just try and do that. So now we have a parameter, and then we need to go to our temp table here, and in the source you can see it's a fixed URL. That's not what we want. We actually want this to be our parameter value. So it has to be link play-by-play. And then when we hit enter, nothing should change because the current value in the parameter is the same as what we had before, but it should do nothing. So that means it's still working. So now whenever we change our parameter, the source here will also change. Just need to see one thing here. Okay, so we actually forgot to do this in our schedule table as well. So right now, whenever we change the selected date, it won't change the schedule because this one is fixed. So we actually need to do the same here and say link schedule. So now instead of taking the fixed URL, it takes this one, which stems from the input we make in the beginning. I hope that makes sense. I forgot to do that. But now we have the temp table here with our parameter, and that is enough. So now we can create a function based on this. So let's just try and do that and see what happens. So create function. We could call it fn for function play-by-play. And now we have a function. So what does this do? So you can enter a URL, hit invoke. So let's just try and do that. So this is the URL. If we hit invoke, then it gets all the plays and puts it into a table. That's what our function does. But we're not really interested in that right now. So you can put in any URL that will work. So we could even change this to 635. We could make it 34. So now it's a different game, but it should still work. So that's how the function works. Now this up here is just our temp table. We only use this in order to create our function. So we can actually just delete this one because we don't need it. It's just a temporary table. Okay, so it may seem a little bit confusing at first, but it really makes a lot of sense. So what we need to do now is we need to invoke our function on this column. So it takes first this as a parameter, and then it takes this one, and then it takes this one. So we need to just select the column, go to add column and say invoke custom function. Select the function and make sure it's the correct column. So now it invokes the function on this particular column. So basically it takes the first URL, hits invoke, takes the next URL, hits invoke, and so on and so forth. So this works, and if we expand this, we'll actually get the play-by-play data. It's as simple as that. So let's just try and expand this, and here we got all the information that we want. So yeah, the period descriptor, let's just pick up the period number. Let's just call this one period. Let's get the time in period, time remaining. Not super interesting when we have the time and period, but let's just keep it for now. Situation code means string state. So I think it's away goaltender 1, away skaters 5, home skaters 5, home goaltender 1. So basically 1551 means 5 on 5. Then you have what kind of event it is, and we have the details part here. So this is where all the information is, and we'll just make sure to hit load more here, otherwise you won't get all the data. And you'll just hit OK and expand it all. So I don't really want to go into details about cleaning this data, but because it needs a lot of cleaning, but we have all the information here that we need. This is all the play-by-play data. So let's just keep it as it is right now and just select everything and detect data type. So the only thing we need to change here is the time and period has to be a text. So let's just make this into a text. Because we need it in this format when we are going to clean it later on. So let's just make it a text. And that's it. Everything else is okay. So this is our play-by-play data for the selected games. So the last thing we need to do is we need to do the exact same just for the shift data. So again, we need to find the URL, then we need to create a parameter, and we need to create a function, and then we need to invoke that function on the URL. So let's just go to the internet again, go to the reference and see. Now we're interested in getting the shift data, and I know that it's all right in here. What we're interested in is the shift charts. So this is the, yeah, we can pick. This is the URL that we are interested in. So we'll just go here and add a new column. And we can call this one link shift. Add in the URL, and then instead of this particular game, we'll just add our game ID column. Just like that, and it should work. This is our URLs that we need to call in order to get the shift data. Let's make it a text. Let's just select one of these. Again, it doesn't matter which one. We're just using it to create our temp table in order to create our function. So let's call this one. And you can see there are 804 shifts in this particular game. So we're just interested in the list here with the data, and we'll just make it into a table. And then again, we could expand the table, but there's no reason to do that just yet, because we can do that afterwards. Our function just needs to get the data and make it into a table. So our function just ends here. And yeah, so we need to create so right now we have this fixed URL and we need to make that into a parameter. So the next thing you need to do is you need to add a new parameter. And we could call this one link shift. And it has to be a text. And we'll just put in the current URL. And that's it. And then we need to change the source from the fixed URL into our parameter. So now when we hit enter, nothing should change because the current value is the same as it was before. Enter, it works. And our function works. So now let's create the function. Our table works, I should say. So let's create the function. And we can call this function shift. And the parameter is link shift, that's correct. Okay, so now we have the function. And again, if we enter a URL, and we can try and make this 34 just to ensure that it works. If we hit invoke, it will go get the data. So it works and everything is good. Let's just delete this one again. And again, this one was just a temp table used to create the function. Doesn't need this one. So let's just delete it. And then instead go to shift data, and now we need to invoke the function on this column. So let's go add column, invoke custom function, choose the correct function. And then you can see here the column is the incorrect one. So we need to change it to link shift, hit enter, and it calls the API and gets the data. So now we just need to expand it. Expand. So this is all of our shift data. So let's just expand it all for now. So again, there's a lot of information here and some of it is just not relevant. I actually don't know what this ID number is. I'm not using that for anything. So we're just interested in the raw data. So we're interested in the team and the start time and the shift number. Shift number is the number of shifts by that particular player in that particular game. So in this case, it's Cam Atkinson has 18 shifts in that game. Yes, also worth noting, you see a 0 here. Well, you can see the start time is 11:28. The end time is also 11:28. So there's actually, there are extra shifts in here that we don't want to have because they don't do anything. They're just there. They do tell some information apparently, but we are not using that information for anything anyway. So if you're not aware of these kind of things, you'll have extra rows that you're not going to use for anything. But that's in the cleaning part, just something to be aware of. But let's just get all the data that we're actually interested in. So we're interested in the end time, the duration. We could choose it, but when we have the end time and the start time, we can always just calculate it. So we'll just leave it out. We need the game ID, but we already have that in the first column. We could add the names, but not really. Hex value is the color code for the team. I don't know why it's put in the shift data, but apparently it is. We do need the period, we need the player ID, we need the shift number, we need the start time, we need the team ID or team abbreviation, and that's it. So let's just say this is what we want. So you have the game ID, you have the end time, start time, period, player ID, shift number, and team ID. That's perfect. So let's just select it all and detect data type. And again, we need to make this into a text rather than a time. And the same for the start time. Make it a text. But other than that, everything looks okay, I think. So now what we've done is we've created a tool where you can select the date, and then it fetches the schedule. It was quite important that we ensure that in the schedule, in the source code, we change this to the link schedule. I forgot to do that in the first place, but this one changes based on the selection that we make out in the Excel workbook. And then it gets the schedule, and then that schedule, that game ID here, is the basis for our play-by-play and our shift data. So whenever we change the date, the selected date, the schedule and the play-by-play data and the shift data should automatically update. Okay, so that's what this tool is supposed to do. So let's just try and load it. Let's just, to begin with, let's just load it, only create the connection. Then we can choose what to select. Okay, so let's just go here and add the schedule to the data model, and we can even just put it in a table just to illustrate that it works. So you can see here, that's the schedule, and we'll do the same for the play-by-play data. It fetches the data, and we'll do the same for the shift data. Alright, so this works. So let's just ensure that it actually works. So let's try and go here and say, instead of January 10th, let's pick up January 11th and see what happens. So let's try and refresh. And it is a little bit confusing that the first time it works, no problem. So okay, so actually this is not the correct play-by-play data, is it? No, it selects the same games. Why is that the case? So the schedule works. It picks up the correct games here. The play-by-play data does not work. Why doesn't it pick up the correct games? Let's go down here. Let's try the refresh. Okay, so because we forgot to change it and we duplicated the schedule before we changed it, so we forgot to do it in the right order. So in here, this is a fixed URL. It has to be the link schedule. So now it should change to the date we selected. It did. And we need to do the same in the shift table. So let's just go and do like this, hit enter. And now I think it should work. So let's just try and load this. Okay, so now it picked up the correct games and calculated, and called the API to get the play-by-play data. So now it should be connected all of it. So if we select a date, it fetches the schedule, the play-by-play data, and the shift data. So this is exactly what we want. Now, let's just try a few things. So let's see what happens if we enter 1980, January 11th. Okay, so it actually still works. The only thing that is needed is that there has to be actual games on the day we select. So now let's look at the data here. So on January 11th, 1980, Quebec played against, I actually don't know what this team is. Maybe someone can help me in the comment section. Vancouver played against Washington, Rangers against Edmonton. I think this is Colorado Rockies against Buffalo. And you have the results and everything. And the play-by-play data, you actually still have the play-by-play data even if you go back to 1980, but the data is a lot less detailed. So all we have is penalties and goals. So it's like a old school game report, but it's still in the data. So you can still get game reports for every single game since 1917, 1918. So you still have information about who's in net, who's scoring, who's the assist, who has the assist, and you can even find information about the penalties. So it works even if you go back when there is no shot location data. It still works. It's just doesn't get enough the same amount of information, but it still gets you the penalties and the goals. So the shift data is just empty because there is no shift data going back to 1980. Okay, so what happened? So we can even try and test it. So let's see if we go back to, let's say 1919, and see what happens. So there might not be a game on this day. I don't know. Okay, so it actually works. There is a game on this day in 1919. So let's go to the schedule. We have one game. And it was between Montreal and I don't know what this team is, but it ended 4-13, so quite a high scoring game, I'd say. But the play-by-play data still works. You still have the penalty, you still have the goals. Now, for some reason in the old days, you didn't have the time code for the penalty, so it's just put in the beginning of the game. I don't think that's true, but you still have the penalties. One interesting thing about penalties back then is that a minor penalty was actually a 3-minute minor. I didn't know that until recently. So very interesting. But you still have the data here, so you can get data all the way back to 1917. I think that's funny and interesting. So the only thing that won't work is if we select a date where there is no game. So let's just see if we can find one of those. So yeah, it will make a mistake if there is no games on the selected date. So you just have to hit escape to ignore it. And you need to find a date where there's actually games being played. Now, the one thing that I forgot to mention is that none of this will work unless you have the correct privacy settings. So you can call the API, call a single API, so you can get the players, you can get the schedules without any problems. But if you're calling multiple APIs at a time, then you have to ignore privacy settings. So there was no error when I did this because my global setting is to ignore privacy settings. So let's just go here, get data, go to query options, go to privacy, and you can say it says always ignore privacy level settings. So because this one is ticked, there is no problem. But that's not the default setting in Excel. So I think this is the default setting. So when it's like this and you try to update, I can try if it will make an error. Maybe it will. Yeah, so now you can see this comes up and you have to say ignore privacy level checks and it will work then, I think. But it's still gonna make a mistake because there's no games on that day. But I'm just getting data from the NHL API and I trust it, so I'll just change the settings back to ignore and say okay. So it should work now. So let's just choose a date here where there's actually a game and hit refresh. But basically this is how you can build a tool that fetches play-by-play data and shift data, and it works. And it works dating all the way back, so I think that's pretty cool as well. Now in the next video I want to show you how you can get shift data not from the API, but getting it from the HTML report. There's a few advantages to doing it that way, because the shift data doesn't upload until after the games are being played. So if you're interested in getting live shift data, you have to scrape it from the HTML reports instead. But we'll do that in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something, and make sure to subscribe.